Michael Hall published an op-ed piece in Refresh Miami that started with the headline, "Where have you been, Miami tech community? Enough." And he went on to write, "It is real simple. Black people in technology want to know where everyone has been during the last 6 years, and without a substantial answer, these so-called responses from community organizations look like marketing ploys. If you're confused as to why you're receiving pushback, and it is because Black people in Miami's startup community didn't just show up. We've been here. Where have you been? And your current efforts are tone deaf. Instead of listening, you're all just getting more defensive." Those are textual quotes from Michael Hall. So let's listen to Michael, Chief of Ideation, Managing Partner of MediumFour, a successful marketing agency, and Digital Grass that is dedicated to establishing a diverse entrepreneurial ecosystem. Michael is alumni from FSU and graduated from Goldman Sachs 10K Small Business Program. He hosts the podcast, which we will not give the full name immediately, FUCK. It is the mic on? Well, today the mic is on, and aquí y ahora, here and now, we have with us Michael Hall, a person very well liked and respected in Miami, for a conversation with Juan Pablo Cappello, the managing partner and founder of PAG.law, the exclusive sponsors of Aquí y Ahora, the podcast that's here with you right now.
Michael, thanks for joining.
No problem. Thanks for having me, man. Thanks for having me.
So fuck it. Is this mic on? Is it the name of your podcast?
Hey, it was one of those things. You always have conversations with your friends, and it became a thing where it's like, man, fuck, I wish I had a microphone recording these conversations. And then, of course, the play on words, microphone, and then Michael, myself. So it was an opportunity for me to just have real direct conversations with friends, catching up with people. One of them was really emotional, catching up with a cousin I hadn't talked to in like 10 years. So just real conversations with real people.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting. I mean, we're obviously on different paths and different journeys, but with definitely some points of communion. I saw you started your podcast right about the same time I started mine. Right, sort of as we were nestling into this pandemic.
Yeah, I released it around that time. I started recording last year.
Oh, okay.
I started recording before Christmas. I was trying to, for once, take a 7 or 8 week hiatus.
Okay.
Because I don't really take vacations.
Right.
And I just needed a true hard reset.
Uh-huh.
But, I'm still a creative, and with your downtime, sitting totally idle just feels weird at some point. So I was like, you know what? I'll get a soundboard. We're not recording tech beats and bites, and just want to see what my friends are doing. And, some of your conversations with your friends, especially when you're entrepreneurs having conversations, it could be all personal, or it could turn over and turn into business. And when it turns into business, it's like, shit, some of this stuff we're saying people need to hear because they don't know what it really takes to be an entrepreneur. So I started recording, and then it just went from there.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I had that same feeling for a couple of years where I would have great conversations. Often, I'm in tech, mainly focused in LATAM, but I would, bump into people who I'd see, sort of once a year kind of, people, but who were really collectively creating this Tecno Latino, this tech ecosystem in Latin America. And yeah, a lot of times I just was like, man, I wish, it was almost like over coffee. I was like, man, I wish I had a microphone. and yeah, then, I sort of like you, I just sort of thought, hey, let's come up with a format, and I can almost do like a virtual coffee with people. But hey, what really, I'm obviously interested in hearing about your journey and what you're up to. But, as what I'm trying to do is really think about, how we can grow and improve the tech ecosystem here in South Florida. As you might know, I'm sort of passionate about this for about the last 9 years. I was a partner in the first online bank in Latin America, and we brought it up to Miami, the holding company to Miami headquarters, and then we ended up selling the bank to Banco Santander for about $700 million. And in about 2010, 2011, when things were back getting going in tech, I'd been living in Miami about 10 years, and my daughters were, 13, 10, and 7. And I just really thought like, hey, I have such great hopes for my daughters, that they go out into the world, have amazing experiences, but hopefully come back to Miami, their late 20s, early 30s, when they're thinking maybe about starting families or, just coming back home. And I didn't, it would be fine, but I was like, God, I hope their opportunities in Miami aren't just being real estate agents or
right
or money managers, right? Or waitresses, or just like, hey, let's hope that there's a little bit more for them to do down here. And that's when I really began thinking about tech as sort of a driver of good jobs and opportunity, and that there was a lot more we could do in Miami to sort of create an environment or infrastructure that would allow a tech ecosystem to blossom. And I know you've been quite outspoken, and it obviously resonated with me. Some of your criticism and constructive criticism and ideas about how to make the tech ecosystem down here better and more inclusive.
Correct.
I wanted to chat a bit about that.
Yeah, the biggest thing for me was the difference between the ideology of this melting pot that we appear to have versus a mosaic layout where you have all these different colors and all these different cultures, but they don't really merge together.
Yeah.
And it's just not as well orchestrated as people may think, because without the mesh, you really don't have it. And with such a lateral company that goes A to B with most of their life and I guess you could say their structure of how they even do daily life, we don't have to cross each other's path unless we're destined to. And a lot of people that want to do work in environments and in different communities, they don't really have to cross into those communities to actually know what's going on.
Right.
A little bit different if you're walking in Philly or taking a train in New York. There's certain lives and there's certain things you're going to encounter, whether you want to or not. And
you just hit such an interesting point, because I lived in New York for 9 years before I moved down here. And in New York, things, as you're alluding to, and I imagine Philly and cities better than I do, are probably this way. In New York, things were much less segregated,
right,
at least amongst people of color. And it was very sort of, stark, noticeable to me in terms of, the wide range of friends I sort of had in New York, and how all these communities, it was more of a melting pot. I mean, obviously, culturally, you have certain affinities, there's if New York was New York is the second biggest city for Puerto Ricans outside of Puerto Rico. Like it's sort of like these weird, there are definitely little pockets, but it's just like I felt like I had a United Nations group of friends, and at least again amongst people of color, there was a lot less segregation. Well, I was surprised when I came to Miami, because I could tell it was a super diverse city, but the reality is, the vast majority of my friends, especially the first 10 years I was in Miami, were just Latins, sort of bicultural Latins, a bit like me. And I think you're right that one thing I have heard a lot in terms of, just people patting themselves on the back is, that we're such a diverse city. We're really, the city of the future. But we aren't really being honest that while we might be diverse, we're still very segregated. Has that been your experience? Have you lived here a long time?
I've been here for 14 years. And then with the 14 years that I've been here, I saw a lot of the interactions and I saw a lot of things happening. But like you said, I didn't see things coming together. So
right.
I would say probably the first 6 to 8 years, I didn't even pay attention to it. It wasn't really a focus or concern of mine. It didn't matter to me because I was focused on being one of the largest Black-owned marketing agencies. So I kind of had a targeted market and a targeted demographic.
Right.
And work was flowing by word of mouth. But it was the first time my experience down here, it was the first time where I was consistently, or I was being asked, where are you from? And all I'm saying is, Panama City, or I was born in Alabama. I wasn't even aware of like the culture aspect. So it was like they were really trying to ask, was I Haitian, Jamaican, or something of an extent?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I'm thinking, okay, never had that happen because it wasn't even really a thing even when I was at Florida State. You were black, we were such in limited numbers, you just had to stick together just to stick together.
Right. And here even within the Black community, I guess what you're saying is there's still a bit of segregation or people sort of sticking with their own tribe.
Right. And it wasn't like I wasn't being accepted, but it was still just weird. Like, where do you mean, where am I from? I'm from Alabama. I mean, I'm from Panama City. Like, no, but where are you from?
Planet Earth is right. Planet Earth, right?
Like, I don't have anything else I can tell you. I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, if you want me to try to get into some slave documentation, I can try to look for that, but I really don't know where else I can tell you I'm from besides that.
Right.
So once I experienced that, it did change a lot of my perspective where I was wondering why that was important. But then I learned a lot about culture here too, experiencing of Haitian food, Jamaican food, the dancing and everything else. So I embraced the culture because it was food and different things I got to experience that I had never tried before. But it was definitely, like you said, in if you think about New York,
right,
Black and brown, it was, when it came down, you might have had your little inner squabbles, but when it came down to going against the system, those forces united. I always think about, I always tell people, watch Do the Right Thing, or hell, watch any of Spike Lee's movies. You can kind of see where that comes from, Fort Greene. So it was definitely a culture shock to some degree.
Yeah, no, I definitely, shared that experience. And then, fast forwarding a little bit, obviously with the piece you put out in Refresh, which for me was a very refreshing piece. But obviously, there were definitely some things going on that, obviously motivated you to, put pen to paper and sort of call out some things that you're seeing that you don't think are headed in the right direction. I guess, I want to talk about that, but then I also want to talk about, from your perspective, what people like me, I'm always like, listen, I'm willing to admit I may have been part of the problem, whatever that problem is. And all I can try to do is think, looking forward, what I can do to be better and, be more supportive to, maybe some issues that I haven't been as sensitive to in the past. So that's really, one reason I wanted to get you on is I think people are very interested in your perspective and in other perspectives maybe that they aren't hearing. But then also, I think there's a lot of people like me who just, want to figure out what can we do from an actionable perspective. And just going back to, how I got involved in tech in Miami was literally in like 2010, 2011. I realized there were a lot of people in positions like mine just bitching about what Miami didn't have in terms of a techie infrastructure. And I remember once, I think I was smoking a joint with a couple of friends, and I was like, yeah, this is bullshit that, people who could do something are just bitching rather than doing anything. And I realized as I said that, I was talking about myself. And that's where we reached into our pockets and put, some real money on the table. And we started the Lab Miami Angels. We began doing conferences, and we just began trying to build some infrastructure where hopefully a tech ecosystem would start to grow. Right. And yeah, I'm sort of feeling now like, with what's going on with Black Lives Matter and police brutality issues and realizing, how undiverse tech is. Local examples like Brian Brackeen being squeezed out of his company and then, going to meet great success, or Max from Caribou, a local, company that raised, over $1 million in venture funding, which is great. But then, she allowed me that she was only the 49th Hispanic female to ever raise more than $1 million in venture, which venture has been around 20 years. So what, we have 2.5 Hispanic females a year raising over $1 million, which even isn't that much money in tech, which is bullshit. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of understand from you what for you was sort of the inflection point to get you to publish that article in Refresh.
Well, there's a couple of things I want to touch on. I definitely want to come back to the lab. I want to touch on that part with you.
Yeah, of course.
And so moving on with that, one of the bigger issues was I just felt like it was a chance where people were monetizing off of their new concern for Black people.
What do you mean by that? Just explain that to me. Or
so we put together the Justice for Trayvon Martin campaign, and that was done as far as the very beginning. If you think about social activism using social media, that was one of the first major campaigns, and I was working with my company was working with Benjamin Crump and Daryl Parks, and we worked directly with Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin. The actual paperwork that was filed with the Miami Foundation to start the foundation was done with myself and Marlon Hill. Okay. So that's how involved I was with that. So the biggest thing is you go through something like that and you're looking at those situations, and I don't remember none of those faces being around then, right?
Got it.
So then after you look at no faces being around then and no support, then you have, Eric Gardner, Michael Brown, you have all these different cases where the same thing is happening. And fast forward past that, you have Colin Kaepernick and still silence. So this isn't a new issue. And I understand there's a point where people just wake up, but you had Digital Grass, Haiti Tech, Black Tech Week. You had organizations speaking about these things. And if people would have just showed up and supported, you would hear these issues. They wouldn't be new issues.
Right.
They would continue to go, and they would be something you would understand and you would see them. So we're trying to tell people these things and they're ignoring it. You feel ignored to some extent. You feel like this is an issue that could have been addressed a long time ago.
Right.
And it's been ignored. And now it's like, oh, well, since it's COVID, everything is slow. And now that major companies have said, hey, we're not going to do this and we're not going to partake in these things and we want to change the outlook of racism, you decide, oh, now we want to be involved. But, Trayvon was from South Florida.
Right.
George Floyd is all the way up in Minnesota. So when it happens in your own backyard, you're not there. But when it becomes a national issue where it seems like now is the good time, and I hate to say it this way, but
but I want to be honest. I want to know what you're really thinking.
So it's like now is the good time to not be racist, or now is the time it cares, because from a marketing standpoint, it looks good right now. There's nothing else to lean on. There's no sports. There's no other way to get your brand out there. There's nothing else attached to. There's no banners to buy. There's no posters to put up. There's no conferences you can link yourself to and get that exposure and get that hand clap. And it's like, but this is the thing you're going to do it with. And when it was a hackathon, that just irked my soul, because you have people like Gregory Johnson that's been doing events like this, and he wasn't getting the support. So it's like, why now? And it bothered me.
Did you feel, Michael, sorry to interrupt, but did you feel that there was something unique to Miami? Or, I guess my question is, I totally understand that frustration. And I can only imagine for somebody, when these are issues of literally life and death affecting, humans generally, but the Black community specifically. And, you just feel like there was so much opportunities for the larger community to step up and support these injustices, that's super frustrating. And I get that.
And that's exactly what it was.
Was that, do you think it was worse here in Miami in terms of, or you just are disappointed in Miami, particularly because there's so many people of color?
I guess my biggest thing is I'm only ever going to speak out about what I know.
Okay, got it.
So I'm not in Atlanta to speak out on Atlanta. If I was in Philly, I probably would have made the same post for Philly, but I'm going to speak out where I'm at.
Got it. No, that's fair. And then in terms of Miami Tech, I mean, what's interesting, you're seeing this, even checking out, your website, which I love. It says about the Martian,
right?
Refer to yourself, but it seems like you're an artist. Your art, by the way, is amazing.
Thank you very much.
Have your podcast, which maybe you even have two podcasts. I listened to an episode of Fuck It, Is the Mic On? And then you have your business, which I guess you're sort of combining coaching, personal development, and obviously you have a decade plus of experience in digital marketing. So I imagine that's a big focus of the coaching. So you're sort of well positioned because you're seeing the tech ecosystem here, or the ecosystem here, from all these different angles, as an artist, as somebody who's been involved in tech, and now is coaching sort of the next generation of entrepreneurs, and sort of trying to inspire people to succeed through your Art of Entrepreneurship course, and then as a podcaster. So yeah, what do you think in Miami sort of should be done? What should people be doing? What should people like me be doing?
So I'm going to go back to when you say like the people like you thing. The one thing I always use as an example was you had people with money founding and supported Lab Miami, right? And the funny thing is, Digital Grass was founded because of the lack of diversity we saw in Lab.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was myself, LaToya. We would see Brian Burkeen and his then business partner that would come, Sophia Nelson, Anne Marie, and Dante. And LaToya would normally be there with one of her sisters. And we kept coming to these events, and it was just us. We kept seeing just us. And then, Derek and Felicia were there, but it was like, if we don't get a group together to tell people about what's going on right around the corner for them, they're never going to know.
Right.
And it's one of those things, like, I wouldn't expect it to be your issue to fix because you're not there in the community. You're not there in Overtown. You're not in Miami Gardens. You're not in Carroll City. So I don't always want to put the responsibility on somebody else. But when somebody else realizes there's a lack thereof and they want to fix the problem, don't ask the problem to be fixed for free. If you realize that your roof is leaking, you don't call a roofer to come fix your roof for free. You expect to pay the roofer.
Right.
And my thing is, there was a hole in the ecosystem and there's people that can fix it. But if you really care about fixing it, it's kind of like you don't do a fundraiser. You don't just do something just because. Pay the people that's actually fixing it, maybe on a smaller scale, but you have to have the vision and the insight as an entrepreneur, an investor, or somebody that's over a foundation or over a fund. You have to have the insight that, hey, if this person is doing 10x with no funding and doing it on their own, what could they do if they had $1 million behind them? What could they do if they had $5 million behind them? What could they do if they had my expertise and my services to support them? That's what it would look like. And you have to have that same vision. Like, they could probably make a 10 times impact. So if they're only touching 20 people in an event, if they really had your support, that 20 turns into 200.
Right. And in your refresh piece, you alluded to Felicia. It seemed that what you were saying was that, there's certain, people, that, like Brian, who got sort of outsized attention, and were like invited to every event. And then, which meant that, it was as if, the community of, Black entrepreneurs or people interested in tech was this very small universe. And I guess your point was that it's a much bigger universe. It's just, certain people are being given a seat at the table and literally other people aren't.
yeah, you can't keep tokenizing the same people. You know, if they make referrals or they're telling you somebody else, that person may make you uncomfortable. They may be pro or they may be very outspoken, but those are the things you're going to have because you need a real conversation. And some people don't have financial freedom. So when they're placed in a certain place, they're going to be limited on what they speak of and what they say because they don't want to risk their money.
Right.
So, you know, if Brian, it's like that. I have a black friend. If Brian was always your go-to, did you ever ask Brian if there's somebody else you would suggest? And if you did, why didn't you reach out to him?
Yeah.
So there's other voices to be heard.
And thinking about now and the moment, I mean, we sort of are where we are, right? And I totally understand your frustration because, again, I mean, these are issues of life and death beyond, you know, just the history of injustice, right? So I get it. You know, looking forward, you know, talking to somebody like me, you know, I have some money, I've invested, I've put time into trying to make things better and make Miami, you know, sort of better city for my daughters to move back to, and hopefully a better city for entrepreneurs of, you know, all walks of life, of all backgrounds, to be able to build companies here. But obviously, and you know, the point's very well taken. You know, collectively, and me in particular, I haven't done enough to support the Black community, and I'm sure other communities of you know, underserved communities as well. You know, what should I be doing? What can I be doing other than having conversations like this?
Well, it starts with the conversation because you have to be able to ask the question, what should I be doing, right? If you don't ask the question, you don't ever know. But I mean, there's organizations to be funded, but the biggest thing is a lot of people in the Black community need mentorship, guidance, and they need those opportunities. So you have to think if somebody like Derek, Felicia, and Brian are there to do those things, they can reach out to those communities. They can do it, but they just simply need funding to do it. And they can't be underfunded. And you can't look at them with the same lens of expectations because they're starting from a different standpoint.
Yeah.
So you can't expect a space called Tribe to have the results of Lab when Lab has been around for, you know, since the beginning when there was no other co-work space to go to. And then you also got to look at the financial restraints of who they're reaching out to. Those financial restraints are putting them in a position where they can't even afford to be there. So how can I pay rent if I can't charge the people that I'm trying to build up because they can't afford it to be there in the first place? So if you keep looking at the restraints, and the restraints are set up different, and the goals are looked up different, you might see a different result, right? So if you look at somebody and it's like, oh, well, they ran the 100-yard race in 13 seconds. This other person ran it in 12 seconds. But did you realize they ran it in 13 seconds and they had a 6-year delay, right? And they were carrying an extra 200 pounds of baggage along with them because they were dragging someone. So they only fell a second short, but in your eyes, the only thing people are seeing is they lost. They're not seeing everything else that went with it. So I'm just asking people, see everything that goes with it when you're asking people to fulfill these goals and to fulfill these things, but at least give them the opportunity and put a delegation together. Every organization should be paying someone to come and evaluate, and not someone that's going to suffer repercussions because it's their job. Right. You know, a chief diversity officer at a company is going to always be afraid to fully speak up because they could get fired. But you need someone that can come into your company and be like, hey, these efforts suck. You aren't doing shit over here. You really haven't even touched this community. This community has no idea what you're doing or who you are. So how are you helping a community that doesn't even recognize you?
And obviously you had some choice words in your piece talking about that, about the night. And for full disclosure, when Matt Hagman was at the Knight Foundation, I was on the community board. Right. I've been on it for the last, 3 years, but I was on there for about 5 years. And I mean, I can tell you, and again, with all, and this is me talking, I'm not talking on behalf of the Knight Foundation. You know, initially, you know, when we started collaborating with the Knight Foundation, you know, it was all about, you know, building a tech ecosystem in Miami. And I think, quite honestly, given Miami is inherently so diverse, especially relative to the rest of the country, we just sort of sat on our laurels and just sort of, you know, hey, so many Latins, whatever. and with the sprinkling of people from other races and things. But quite honestly, I think the first 3 or 4 years, it just issues of race and even gender, quite honestly, as well as other issues, just weren't what we were focused on. And then I definitely remember at the Knight Foundation, Matt and Alberto really beginning, and I think quite honestly, there was some criticism from the head of the school board, or there were a few government officials within Miami who sort of brought this issue up that, hey, this is tech can be very elitist. It's very undiverse nationally, and is this really what the Knight Foundation should be doing? And that was 4 or 5 years ago. Probably 5 years ago. And my sense has been that the Knight Foundation has really made diversity and inclusion an important sort of mission,
Right.
within this sort of tech innovation subcategory that they've been focused on in Miami, along with supporting the arts. But it seemed that from your piece that you felt that they haven't done nearly enough. Why don't you speak to that and where that frustration comes from?
I just think it's a opportunity that it's been failed and marginalized, because most of the people that they've instilled in to fix this issue normally aren't even from Miami, right?
Mm-hmm.
Power Moves got like $1 million. That lasted for a couple of months, and then they were gone. Something happened with their overall organization.
Right.
So, I mean, I know you wanted me to be honest, so Juan, I'm just going to be honest.
Please.
You can't throw $750,000 or $750,000 or $1.5 million a year to fix a problem that doesn't even have a foundation to build upon yet, when you have the elements of other social injustice, racial injustice, and the lack of even being able to be employed, even if you have it. So you have so many people that I hear a story that sounds one way from the people that are helping them versus the story they tell me, where they still walk away feeling defeated and they can't do anything because they can't even get hired from a job, even though they just received all this amazing training, or they have to build their own company. And a lot of people are just scared to speak up. So I said this to Raul, and I'll say it here with you. If you've given the Latin community and then you've given the predominantly white community $7 million of funding, right? And I'm just hypothetical number. You've given them $7 million of funding in a year. If you haven't given the Black community 14 million, you're really not trying to fix that problem. And it's just an inherent position of, it doesn't matter if he only gave 2 million or if anybody only gave a small percentage. Just know, to me, you're not trying to actually fix the problem. You're just doing enough to get by. Because if I came to you and I said, Juan, I have a company, and the technology, the hardware costs $1 million, but my staff is only going to cost $250,000. You would be like, what kind of company are you running that only needs a $250,000 salary to run $1 million worth of hardware? It's just certain things that, if you remove the emotions and you look at the mathematics of it, you should see it through a different lens. If you want to, racism it's not new. Just like they were talking about the Southern flag with Golden Girls. Blanche was talking about the Southern flag on Golden Girls. That was from 1988. These aren't new issues, but we've had the same solutions to them. So you throw 15 or 10% of your budget to the Black community to fix the Black community. That's not enough.
Yeah.
It's not enough just to show up for one day of Black Tech Week. It's not enough to just talk to Felicia and she has to do 700 different engagements when there's 4 different Felicias. There's other people that have a voice, that have something to say. There's other people that can speak up. But it's just, if you don't really want to fix the problem, quit using it as a political stance or a goodwill stance to make your ego feel better. If you really want to fix the problem, it takes money. You have to cut a check, because this isn't just about racism. This is about class war, classism, and poverty. The freedom that you're speaking of, the freedom I have that most people may not have, is financial freedom, because everybody in Miami only knows me for digital grass. They don't know me for a 14-year marketing company that's successfully a multi-million-dollar business that's launched over 300 companies. But I hear people saying they want to build entrepreneurs. Well, if you want to build entrepreneurs and I've helped build over 300 brands, why haven't you hired me to come and do that for the community?
Right.
Why haven't you given me $25,000 for each company and say, hey, this company is going to help you in this way. They're going to help you with your QuickBooks. They're going to help you with, and you got to listen to what I'm saying. Listen to what I'm saying versus the conversations me and you have. Help them with QuickBooks, help them with LLC, help them with payroll, help them with setting up a proper Facebook page. Some people need basic things just to get the company off the ground to have something substantial to pass on.
Mm-hmm.
So if me and you are looking at the lens and you're looking at, you sold your company for 300 million. I don't know how many Black people are going to sell a company for 300 million in the next 10 years, right?
Right.
But I could tell you how many Black people could live a substantially different life if they had a company making $150,000. Look at that number, 150,000 versus 300 million. Now, is that life changing for the world? No, but that might be enough to put somebody through college. That's enough to pay bills. That's enough income to actually get a mortgage to buy a house. So if you don't care about if you don't care about the companies under $250,000, to me, you're overlooking the Black community. You're overlooking minorities in general. You're overlooking women. Every company can't be a 10X company. Every company won't have a exit of 300. But if you really need to get your money back, do a revenue share with these companies. Quit waiting for them to sell. Like, we can talk numbers in different ways. Data doesn't lie. So if you put 50,000 into a tire company and they hire 3 people from the community, and that tire company ends up increasing its revenue by 200%, and they're now making $250,000, you get your money back. 3 people are employed and they're building a business. The numbers may not look as glamorous.
Right.
That's already how we feel being Black. We're only glamorous when we're actually on a playing field or on a screen entertaining. I want to be glamorous just because I own a $250,000 company. I'm taking care of myself. I can take care of my household. So when I hear people like, oh, but that's too small. It's too small to you, but it's a life-changing event for somebody else. It's not like slavery was 400 years ago.
Right.
Slavery lasted for 400 years and it's still going on now. So what do we really want to do to break people free? It's financial freedom, because the internal hate that some people have just for skin color would never be removed and will never go away. But if I can work from home and not have to deal with that inherent racism every day, you know how good that is for somebody's morale and to remove themselves from the PTSD of being Black in America?
Right.
So do we really want to fix the problem? I don't know. When I hear people like you, and when I hear someone that really wants to have a conversation that doesn't get offended, when I'm like, hey, lab was good, but did the lab ever come outside of lab doors and go into Overtown and ask people, do you know what lab is? I'm willing to answer that question. No.
Oh, look, I'm one of the owners. I'm one of the founders. I can absolutely say no. And
that's where I stand. Is it your fault?
That's shame on us. I mean, you obviously just spoke very passionately, and a lot of what you said resonated with me. And I was just thinking as you were talking, how is it that I, miss the issue? Is it just,
What part of New York did you grow up in?
I'm from Chile, actually. I grew up in Chile. I went to high school in New Jersey.
Okay.
And my dad commuted into New York, and then I lived in New York for 9 years.
So the 9 years you lived in New York, what part of New York did you live in?
In downtown. I went to NYU Law, and so I lived in Village, Soho, and then I lived in Brooklyn with my girlfriend.
All right. So my thing is, what's the chances of you knowing the crisis that's going on in Queens when you were living in Soho?
0.
So what would it have taken for you to even know the crisis of what was going on in Queens while you were in Soho?
Other than my Black friends,
right?
If you want to know the truth, yeah, just I was.
So if your Black friends in Queens, if they doing all right, let's just say they doing all right, and it's not their mission to fix Queens.
Doing all right.
Yeah, they not even bringing it up. So it's not your fault that you missed it. It's the actions that follow it, because it doesn't take me. What it takes is Juan to go up to somebody and be like, yo, Mike is a real asshole, but he has a lot of points he's making, and I think he can help out with this issue. Let's put up $4 million for his organization, filter the money and see how he does with it. Or let's give this to Felicia, and they're going to look, wow, we're not getting rich. This, everything can't be an ROI. Maybe some things are ROI to your heart. Yeah. Maybe it just feels good to know that you've made a difference.
I'm going to give you, a lot of what you're saying really resonates because, I'm thinking, you mentioned Gregory, who's just, an amazing person.
Mm-hmm.
But, I met Gregory when he was in high school, and you're right. We did not. I mean, I'm sure that, if we had Wi-Fi on and, Danny and some of the people who were running it, they'd,
Mm-hmm.
cite some examples where we did do some community outreach. But the point's really well taken, Michael. We didn't do enough, right?
Right, but you have people like you, not to cut you off, but you have people like you and people like Wi-Fi that y'all speak up relentlessly because it comes with the financial freedom. You're only here to help.
Yeah.
You're not here for the publicity. And my thing is, if you're here to help, speak openly, speak passionately, and cut a check. I mean,
that's what I wanted to hear. I mean, and look, I'm going to give you an example, and I am a little embarrassed because it's one of these examples that if I'd been talking 6 months ago, I'd talk it. It would seem like a good story, but when I reflect on what you just said, I realize it was a call to action, and I should have done better. So, we had launched the lab 6 months, a year before. And I
Mm-hmm.
there, I worked out of there sort of every other day for a few hours. And Gregory Johnson, he's a high school kid. I think he's like a junior in high school.
Right.
Just hanging out, this, skinny black kid, just hanging out. Cool. So, I don't know. I just friendly guy, just, and he actually came up to me and said, "Hey, I saw you speak at this," very sort of engaging and basically saying, I'm interested in learning. Like, what advice do you got for me? Almost sort of reaching out, like, not like I need a mentor, but a little bit like,
Yeah, absolutely.
Just really engaging. And I remember, he and I had a couple conversations, and Matt Hagman came by, and I was like, "Matt, you got to meet this guy," and Matt sort of takes him under his wing. And I think we all felt like, oh, isn't that nice? There's this, young guy who happens to be black and super proactive. And, I think he really, became part of the fabric of the community of the lab. And, got good advice and has gotten, good support from those relationships. But you're right. For every Gregory Johnson who, had the wherewithal, the presence, the, to come into the lab.
Right.
That's pretty daunting. And you're right, especially, when he walked into the lab. I mean, there might have been a few, Dominican kids speaking Spanish who were proud, but you know what I mean? There weren't a lot of people that looked like him. And there weren't any people, as far as I remember, that we hired like from over town. That came a little later. I mean, when Matt and the Knight began talking a bit more about diversity, yeah, I mean, again, it wasn't that we were, I don't know.
But you got to think about this also, Juan. Yeah. How many Gregories came that when they came, they weren't greeted that way, and they don't have that kind of hunger that Greg has?
No,
it felt unwelcome. You know what I'm saying?
And as you're talking, I literally got goosebumps because it was like I've looked at the Gregory Johnson story as, hey, isn't that great that we're inviting the community in? What I wasn't realizing from my, white privilege perspective was, no, to invite that community in, we have to open our doors and bring them in.
Right.
Not think that they're going to organically walk in. It would be, I get it. It would be like somebody who looks like me showing up in Overtown to, some gringy, pool hall and, walking in and thinking like, yeah, hey, don't you want to be friends? Like,
right.
Maybe it's a super nice bunch of guys, but, I can see why, I would be very intimidated maybe,
But I'm going to take you somewhere else with what you just said. Let's put that in reverse though.
Yeah.
Let's imagine you walk into a high-end facility of Black millionaires, 100,000aires, and you walk in, the first thing they think is, we've probably made it. Here's our chance to go to a next level, right? What does he want? What can he offer? And if you come in there and you just want to do the work, you're like, no, I'm here to invest because I want to. They accept you. Now you flip that up on the back end. Flip it around. I go into Brickell, high-end place. I'm around billionaires and millionaires. I'm walking in thinking, hey, I can help expand the market to a younger demographic and a whole different demographic of where your products aren't reaching. I'm not looked at as an opportunity. I'm looked at as what the hell does he want, and is this the help?
Yeah.
It's those initial perceptions of how America is structured that limits anything, because Gregory is a go-getter. Like, I can't tell you how many times, and I'm not trying to boast for it, but how many times I've had conversations with Greg, like, you don't stop, you don't give up, and if you have a problem, you call me. Because my biggest thing was, Greg shouldn't have to fight the battle that I just got finished fighting.
Got it.
So if somebody tries my little brother, yo, you're not gonna do that with Greg. Hey, not him, not today, bro. That's the wrong one. It's I've had to do that once or twice. Like, you're not gonna disrespect Greg. Like, Greg needs your help, you help him.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, the what I'm realizing, and you make such a good point, is Greg is an amazing person. He's an outlier. He deserves all the success he's had and is gonna have. But how many other Gregories are out there that, right, the day they walked in the lab, they didn't get that reception. They walked by, they didn't have the courage to come in because, we weren't making it inviting enough, and, whatever had happened in their lives where they had been turned away. And
I mean, the only reason why I made it through is because I'm just used to fighting, right?
No, and I get your point, and it's a good point, which is, listen, if we want to change that dynamic, when I say we, my community, right?
Right.
Not the Black community. My community, even the Latin community, we're going to have to reach deep and do more than we think we need to do in order to, get things back in balance. And until things are in balance, as a tech community, we're going to continue to be embarrassed by the lack of diversity. I mean, like I say, seeing what happened to Brian Brackeen, terrible.
Horrible.
Hearing from Max that it's 2020 and she's the only fucking 49th, Hispanic female to raise $1 million. It almost makes me want to puke. And I know that the numbers, the numbers in the Black community in venture are even more embarrassing than the numbers for the Hispanic community. So,
or like they say, just take the Hispanic community from South Florida and let them go chill in New York or North Florida for a little bit, and they'll realize how real life is versus this bubble we get.
It is true. I've had to explain that to look, I went to Duke, in the early 80s. And, with a name like Juan Pablo. And I didn't, I think because when I grew up in Chile, and, in New York, especially, with my skin color, and my mom's American, my English wasn't terrible when I came to the States, I sort of slid right in. But yeah, it was when I got to Duke, I realized, I realized on campus that, the brown people on campus, we all stuck together. I was also an athlete. And so we were everyone assumed we had all gotten in either, because of sports and or affirmative action. And
not because you were just smart as hell and just happened to be an athlete.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not saying my serve didn't hurt, but yeah. And so I ended up taking a third of my classes at Chapel Hill because I just felt like that was just a much more authentic place to be. And it was, Duke felt like a bird sanctuary for white people. But I agree. I mean, being down here, if you're Hispanic, you don't have to face, because, some of the poorest people in Miami are Hispanic, but also many of the wealthiest. And unfortunately, in the Black community, there are obviously some extremely wealthy Black people, but, overall, it's not as equal, and with the Hispanic community, it's like we fill up all the buckets socioeconomically, right? Obviously, in the Black community, it's been disadvantaged economically for a long time.
So you got to think, in our community, we don't have the Manas and the Manny Medinas that have billions of dollars that can reach into their pockets and go back into the actual pot and not just fertilize and see it. They have so much money they can expedite to see the fruits of their labor while they're still here. It's like, they get to plant the roses and smell the roses before they're gone.
Yeah.
And that's how much money they have. But
and I think you're really right, because there's this in tech they talk about the PayPal effect. How in PayPal you had people like Elon Musk who went, there was this
PayPal mafia, the 13
right, the PayPal mafia, right? That, and you definitely have seen that, in entertainment and things, obviously with the Black community, but we haven't seen that in tech, and that. And quite honestly, that's on us, on the non-Black community, to, help lift the right people up and, showcase those success stories. I agree.
I went to EJI in Montgomery, Alabama. I grew up in Alabama. I've never been to Montgomery to see. I saw in Montgomery, Alabama, I got to see the Confederate White House. That Confederate White House is still standing right across the street from the city hall. Just imagine the daunting effect of being Black in Montgomery, and you see that every time you got to go to City Hall. So I'm at the EJI where they have the memorial to the lynching memorial, which is the only Black memorial for slavery in the United States of America. Okay. And the most chilling thing I heard was a quote that came from Martin Luther King. And this was his last interview he was able to do before he got assassinated. Because people don't realize Martin Luther King wasn't assassinated for peace. He was assassinated because he was about to compose and structure for Black people to start making money and to actually almost resegregate so they could live in their own communities, basically trying to replicate what was done in Tulsa and everywhere else, Rosewood. And he said, you cannot expect a man to pull himself up by the bootstraps when he is bootless.
Right.
And I've always used that quote, and almost every time I have a conversation like this, because I want people to understand, quit asking Black people to bootstrap to make their success. We don't have the boots yet. We're building the damn boot. If you give us the boot, we will most likely outdo you, which is what happened when you saw what happened in sports. When they integrated sports, what would have been your MEAC, SWAC, and your HBCUs, they came to NCAAs and they just took over. So just imagine the mind is just as powerful as the body, but the body cannot do anything the mind will not allow itself to do. So if you want to see the greatness, the things that take things to the edge, the trendsetters, we're more than, and I'm not even saying this to you, I'm saying this to those that are listening. We're more than hip hop. We're more than just music. We're George Washington Carver. We're Booker T. Washington. We're teaching people 300 plus ways just to use a peanut. You're talking about revolutionary people. Most of the patents and most things that are in America were stolen from Black men that were slaves that couldn't patent it. Right. So if you have that amount of mind and that amount of resource, and even if you start talking about just inclusion in general, when you start talking about women, if you have the success ratio that 85% of companies that have diversity and inclusion in their executive suites have success, and they're successful companies, why do you continue to invest in old white men that are just able to go bankrupt and get to do it all over again? How many Black people have been allowed to go bankrupt and start over? They talk about MC Hammer, but as MC Hammer told me when I interviewed him late night after CES and AVN, which was the weekend of freaks and geeks when they used to do AVN and CES on the same.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And Hammer told me there's a difference between filing bankruptcy and being broke. I've never made less than $150,000 since I was 13 years old. MC Hammer invested into Twitter when it was nobody's interest. He was the first person to have 1 million followers. Even in tech, we're normally a trendsetter, but we still don't get credit to it.
Right.
So, I mean, you can say whatever you want to about MySpace and Facebook, but before that, it was Black Planet. So we're here. And I'm glad people are starting to whisper, because to me, this isn't speaking up. These are murmurs of silence that have finally become so uncomfortable that you can no longer interpret them and internalize them. You have to get them out, because at some point you should feel embarrassed to not know the history and the culture. There's so many things about my history as a Black man that I didn't know. And sometimes I hate to say, I didn't know that till I was 35. But it doesn't matter what I didn't know. It's what I do know now, what I'm willing to teach others so they don't have to go through the same thing I went through. And that's the only thing we could ask Juan. The only thing is, can you just go and start $100 million fund? Actually, you probably could. Do I expect you to? No. But do I expect you to call me in the 30 to 60 days? Say, Mike, here's the follow-up. What can I do? Because I have the plan. We have a plan. There's people to support. But right now, my goal is from West Palm Beach down to 195 or 395. That's what I want to see fixed. That's the area that I'm focused on. And even so, I tell people, the world sees Miami as a district. And as much as we talk about Miami, quit leaving out Broward, because most of your Black people that work in Miami actually live in Broward. So Broward is one of the largest counties for Black people. You know, just don't ignore the truth. Quit ignoring the truth. Quit ignoring the facts. You've made your mistake. There's no longer time for a pity party. But if you really want to get it together, unfortunately, you're going to have to call people like me that's willing to kick you in your ass and tell you, no, you've been fucking up, but we can make it better. But you can't make it better just continuously talking about how you want to make it better.
No, and we can't make it better what we've been doing
exactly
for the last 5 years, which is patting ourselves on the back
for the little bit that's been done.
Yeah, and that Michael, I mean, I've agreed with a lot of what you've had to say, and that last point you made, that we got to look in and ask ourselves the hard questions. I mean, my mother used to always say that the quality of your life is in direct proportion to the quality of the questions you're willing to ask yourself. And I really feel, you know, here in the tech community, which is at least the community that I can, you know, I'm really engaged with,
right?
We haven't been asking any of the hard questions, and just the opposite.
So mine comes from Jay-Z. You're only as rich as those that are around you.
I'm going to give you the last. I'm going to give you and Jay-Z the last word. How can a pretty white guy, Dave, compete with you and Jay-Z? No fucking way. Impossible.
But I'm rich with knowledge, and I'm happy to have friends like you and people, because I remember talking to you, walking up. You were never rude or disrespectful, but I also never pulled you aside and say, "Hey, Juan, I got this problem in our community, man. How can you help me?" Unfortunately, even I wasn't Greg. Greg was more aggressive than I was.
Right.
At some point, I just got frustrated. But you know, the difference between doing the march and sitting beside the scene, you know, unfortunately, MLK and Malcolm X all died. Both of them died by the time they were 39. I'm 41. I'm not supposed to be out there marching. I'm organizing the march. I'm on the back end. I'm collecting the checks to keep the march going.
Well, dude, you're fighting the good fight. I'm really appreciative of what you wrote. I think, you know, more people need to step up, but mainly people in the non-Black community need to, as you say, do more than they think they need to do in order to, you know, get everyone.
One of my closing words will have to be
in their bootstraps.
Right. You're an influencer. Use your influence to the power so you can leave a different legacy. You have that opportunity. The opportunity is now. And I look forward to seeing what we can do together. And I look forward to seeing what you do for this community. And I
appreciate it. Thank you so much, buddy. Hold me to it. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Este fue otro programa de Aquí y Ahora, auspiciado por PAG.law, especialista en Venture Capital. Hasta pronto.